This is the village of Cheneux in the Ambleve Valley in the Ardennes. And it was here on the 20th and 21st of December 1944 that the men of 1st Battalion of the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment would be in a desperate battle for control of the village against the forces of Piper's Waffen SS. On the 16th of December 1944, Kampfgruppe Piper, under the command of SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Piper, began its role as the spearhead of the 1st SS Panzerdivision, Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, during the opening stages of the Battle of the Bulge. As part of the 6th Panzer Army, Piper's unit was tasked with driving west through the Ardennes forest and seizing key crossings over the Meuse River. The overall German strategy relied on speed, surprise, and shock, as Piper's armoured column was expected to break through weakly defended American lines and capture critical bridges before US forces could organise a defence. The offensive began at dawn with Kampfgruppe Piper advancing through Blankenheim, Germany, crossing the Belgian border. The initial route took them through wooded and rugged terrain as they sought to avoid major towns and move along lesser-known routes to maintain the element of surprise. By the 17th of December, Piper's unit had begun to push deeper into Belgium, moving westward on a route that took them toward the key locations of Malmedy, Stavelot, and Trois-Ponts. On the 18th of December, Piper's forces approached Stavelot, a crucial crossing point over the Ambleve River. The town was defended by elements of the US 30th Infantry Division, as well as the highly skilled 291st Engineer Combat Battalion, a unit that would play a pivotal role in slowing down Piper's advance. The bridge at Stavelot was essential for Piper's plan, as it would allow his forces to cross the Ambleve River and continue their drive toward the larger bridges at Trois-Ponts and beyond. After advancing through Stavelot, Piper's Kampfgruppe pushed westward with the aim of seizing the bridge at Trois-Ponts, which crossed the Sambre River. Trois-Ponts was one of the most important targets in Piper's route, as it provided a key crossing that would allow his forces to reach the next set of major road junctions. However, when Piper's column arrived, they discovered that the American engineers had already destroyed the bridge before it could be captured. This forced Piper to adjust his route once again. With no direct path to continue his advance west, he was forced to head north toward the villages of L'Église, Stoumont, and Cheneux. This shift in direction added significant complexity to his advance. Instead of maintaining a straight, direct path to the Meuse River, Piper was now funneling his mechanised forces into narrow, winding roads in difficult terrain. The need to secure road junctions at L'Église, Stoumont, and Cheneux further stretched his already limited manpower and resources. In tactical terms, this shift represented a loss of momentum and operational flexibility. Piper would now have to fight for every inch of ground as American forces mounted stronger and more coordinated counterattacks. Cheneux was a small village along the Ambleve River, and Piper decided to establish a defensive position there to protect his flank. Controlling Cheneux would give him a defensive stronghold and allow him to keep the main road to L'Église open. However, Piper's decision to leave a force at Cheneux was a costly one for both the Germans and the Americans. The role of blocking the 6th German Panzer Army's advance west would fall to the 82nd Airborne Division. Veterans of Normandy and Holland, they would now be thrown into the line to hold defensive positions, particularly around the Sambre and Ambleve River valleys. The unit tasked with retaking Cheneux would be given to that of the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment. So this is the bridge over the Ambleve River between L'Église and Cheneux. And it was this bridge here over the Ambleve that was vital to Piper and his Kampfgruppe if they were to continue their advance west. With the engineers blocking the way at Trois-Ponts, after Piper moved north from Trois-Ponts up towards L'Église, he arrived there at about 1300 in the afternoon, met no resistance, and then knew that as long as this bridge was intact, he would be able to continue his advance west. So, moving his forces down this road on the 18th of December, he made it across the bridge in the early afternoon, but then he was to come under heavy attack from P-47s from the United States Army Air Force's 9th Air Force. This is the small Belgian village of Rahir, and after Kampfgruppe Piper had been delayed at Cheneux crossing the Ambleve Bridge there, they would then pass through Rahir on their way to Habillemont to try and take the bridge over the Lienne River and continue their advance west. I'm now stood on the bridge at Habillemont over the Lienne River, and it was here at dusk on the 18th of December that the men from A Company of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion would blunt Piper's advances west. So the men from A Company, having already prepared the bridge for demolition, sat in wait. And as Piper's lead panzer rounded the corner here and faced the bridge, the engineers blew it in their face. As the bridge exploded, Piper could be heard over the din of the noise to be heard, "Those damned engineers, those damned engineers." He knew at this point here at Habillemont that the US Army had yet again put a significant block in his way in proceeding west towards the bridges over the Meuse River. So having crossed the Ambleve River here on this bridge the day previously on the 18th of December 1944, Major von Sacken of the 84th Flak Abteilung that was attached to Kampfgruppe Piper was given orders to defend Cheneux from the Americans in the west and to maintain this bridge and its defences here at all costs. Now the bridge had to be held to allow Piper's fuel reserves to be brought up to the front to enable him to continue his advances further to the west. Although by the 19th of December the bridge at Habillemont over the Liane River had already been blown, Piper on the 19th was now trying to push through Stoumont and trying to escape the Ambleve Valley that way. However, he still needed to maintain control over this bridge to ensure that he had a potential escape route out of the Ambleve and west towards Werbemont and then to the bridges over the Meuse River. This is the village of Rahir, and it was here on the evening of the 19th of December and into the 20th of December that Colonel Reuben H. Tucker, commanding officer of the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 82nd Airborne Division, had moved his forces from Werbemont to here prior to him trying to retake the village of Cheneux. When the 504th arrived in this area, Tucker put the 2nd Battalion in defence of Rahir village itself, 3rd Battalion would be held in reserve, and 1st Battalion would take up positions just to the north of the village. F Company would be on the north side of the village, E Company blocking the front of the village facing eastward, and D Company on the south side. Upon arriving here, Tucker established his regimental headquarters in the village hall here in Rahir, and it was at that point that he ordered all of the civilians to evacuate towards the west, believing that if the Germans managed to push back through here, the fight for the village would be a bitter one. By mid-morning, a patrol from D Company of the 2nd Battalion, 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, led by Sergeant Elton R. Venable, moved east from Rahir towards Cheneux, reaching the vicinity of the Boutet house at around 1100. A half-track and a couple of German riflemen opened fire and wounded Sergeant Venable. At this moment, the regimental S2 Captain Fordyce Gorham was nearby and took command of the patrol and started to lead the men back towards Rahir. Although the officers of the 504th now knew for certain that the Germans occupied Cheneux, they had no idea of the size of the enemy force waiting for them. The task of taking Cheneux would fall to the 1st Battalion under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Willard Harrison. His 3 company commanders were briefed by Captain John M. Randalls, the battalion S3 officer. Not only did 1st Battalion have to capture Cheneux and the bridge over the Ambleve, but also take the village of Broom, a small hilltop village located 3 miles to the southeast of Rahir, behind the 2nd Battalion of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment at the town of Trois Ponts. Company A under Captain John Pease was assigned this task. B and C companies under Captain Thomas C. Heggleston and Albert E. Milroy were to take Cheneux. For the assault, they would have the support of the mortar and machine gun platoons of HQ Company, commanded by Captain Roy E. Anderson, and 4 57mm anti-tank guns from the 1st Platoon of C Battery, 80th Airborne Anti-Aircraft Battalion. Further support was meant to assist 1st Battalion in the form of a platoon of M36 tank destroyers from C Company of the 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion of the 3rd Armoured Division. They should have been at Rahir by 1000 hours on the morning of the 20th, however by the time the assault started they still hadn't arrived. Now this was the road from Rahir to Cheneux, and along this road to my left are fields that you can see are covered with barbed wire fences, and these would play a sadly vital role in the attack by the 504th as they tried to move across these fields both in the daytime and at night, with the men getting hung up on them. And to my left is a wood line. It's not very deep, but then it goes down into the other valley on the right-hand side of the road, and some men from B Company did advance through these positions here. Now, the assault by 1st Battalion onto the village of Cheneux was initially delayed slightly by the fact that Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, the 1st Battalion commander, wanted to bring up a captured SD KFZ 251/9. Now, this particular type of 251 German half-track had a low-velocity 75mm gun mounted on it, and it was put behind 1st Platoon of B Company with the hope of providing much-needed fire support for the lightly armed paratroopers. Now, just after 1500 hours on the 20th of December, the attack was put in by B and C Company of the 1st Battalion of the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment. B Company was in the lead astride either side of the road, with C Company behind along with HQ Company. So first contact with the Germans occurred about 500 yards to the west of Cheneux along this road from one of the German observation posts. They had their riflemen as well as machine gun positions that had been put in place there to cover the approaches that the Germans knew the Americans would come from the direction of Rahir. And it was during that advance across the fields that the men of 1st Platoon B Company were contacted by the Germans, and they came under small arms fire. The paratroopers returned fire, but at this point the Germans had managed to extricate themselves from the firefight, but throughout that process it was a fight and withdrawal for them, and they actually managed to inflict several casualties on the men of 1st Platoon. Now, because of 1st Platoon's stall across the fields, 2nd and 3rd Platoons were now put into the lead, and they were to advance from the woods behind me. So it was at this location here where a smaller road intersects with the main road from Rahir to Cheneux, which is just on my right shoulder there. And the Germans had sighted 2 of their armoured vehicles here with perfect fields of fire looking down to the approaches of Rahir. The 2 vehicles were both SDKFZ 251s, but one was a /9 with a 75mm gun, the same type of half-track that the Americans had captured and were actually using on the attack here at Cheneux, and then a 251/8, which had an 80mm mortar on it. And these were perfectly employed from this position against the approaching Americans. So behind me there is the Boutet house, and it was here where one of the German vehicles with a 20mm flak gun was positioned, and this would become key to the advance here by the Americans. Also located over my shoulder further along the road towards Cheneux would be another 20mm flak gun, which would play a pivotal role in the battle here. Now, the flak guns that were at these positions were motorized. What do I mean by that? Well, they were on the back of vehicles, so the Germans had the ability to maneuver them quickly and bring them into position very rapidly, unlike those that had to be manhandled by crews, the sort that you see in one of the end scenes in Saving Private Ryan. However, the ability for it to devastate infantry with its 20mm cannon rounds was exactly the same. The 20mm flak gun located back at the Boutet house was an SDKFZ 10/5. The one further back toward the Gaspard house was an SDKFZ 251/17. So 2nd and 3rd platoons would deploy from these woods along here. 3rd platoon would head back over the road and establish a base of fire, while 2nd platoon from B Company would manoeuvre along these fields in the direction of the Boutet house toward Cheneux itself. As soon as 2nd platoon started their advance, it was almost as soon as halted by the murderous fire from the 20mm flak guns. They had a clear line of sight now. The houses behind me are modern houses. Only the Boutet and Gaspard house was on this section here where I'm currently stood. The rest of them are all new builds, and the Germans had sighted their guns perfectly. Now, as 2nd platoon took fire, they then quickly made a break for it into the woods off to their right to try and escape the murderous fire that they were under. While this was happening, also the German mortar teams that were in this area started to go to work on the Americans as well. Now, because of this, the Americans called for their own mortar support to come from the direction of Rahir, but sadly, it didn't happen. By this point, the attack had been ongoing for about an hour, and as dusk started to settle over the area here, so did the mist. So after the initial assault, where A Company had taken fire from the withdrawing Germans, they'd been held in reserve, but an hour into the attack, they were now ordered forward on the right flank. Now, unfortunately, there was difficulties with the radios. This wasn't an uncommon occurrence, you know, it happened a lot with radio equipment at that time, so messages had to be relayed by runner, and that caused delays in 1st platoon getting into position ready for their renewed assault. Also at this time, the captured SDKFZ 251/9, that was brought forward. It moved about 220 yards forward from the initial start point towards the village of Cheneux to try and give some much needed fire support to 2nd and 3rd platoon. The two paratroopers crewing the 251 had been very effective using the 75mm gun against the German half-tracks. They'd managed to score a number of hits, but then they received a heavy burst of 20mm flak fire. The shrapnel from that caused injuries, and as a result, they started to withdraw back to the rear. Now, also at this time, the promised tank destroyers finally arrived, but for some reason, the lieutenant in charge of the tank destroyers remained behind the woods where 1st Battalion had jumped off from for their attack, and he felt they were no match for the German armour in the village. So as 1st Platoon commenced their flanking manoeuvre to the right, 11 Company from the SS Panzergrenadiers Regiment 2 from the 1st SS were in and around the Boutet house, and their fire onto the American positions caused the Americans to hold up their attack. Also as well, they were receiving fire from the one remaining German half-track located 150 yards to the west of the Boutet house at that road intersection. Now at this point, it was just about dark, and as B Company fell back towards C Company, they managed to regain contact and then set up a defensive perimeter pretty much back at their original start point. So at 18:45, with the attack on Cheneux stalled, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison called a battalion meeting and wanted to understand what the situation was. He also was able to then provide updates to Colonel Tucker back at Rahia. It was with the information that Lieutenant Colonel Harrison provided Tucker that Tucker decided that a night attack back along the same direction as was tried earlier that afternoon towards Cheneux would be undertaken by the men of 1st Battalion of the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment. Harrison ordered B Company and C Company to attack astride the road, with B Company on the right and C Company on the left, and the two tank destroyers in support on the road. The time set for the attack was 19:30, with a 10-minute preparatory artillery bombardment before the jump-off. As the battalion was preparing, the Germans fired repeatedly into the area where B and C Company were lagered up with 75mm rounds. As the battalion pushed forward, the artillery support promised again did not materialise. 1st Platoon from B Company was in the lead again, and they moved off on the right side of the road, crossing the barbed wire fences and neared the Boutet house once again. As they did so, the Germans spotted them and opened fire. Fortunately for the paratroopers, the slope they were on afforded them some protection, and the German armour wasn't able to depress their barrels low enough to engage them. The German half-track with the 75mm gun at the front of the German positions was silenced by PFC Del Grippo with bursts of fire from his Thompson submachine gun. For this action, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. As this was happening, the SD KFZ-10/5 with the 20mm flak gun mounted on its rear continued its devastating fire on the right flank of C Company as they moved on the left-hand side of the road, trying to cross over the fields. Staff Sergeant William P. Walsh of 1st Platoon B Company, who had already been wounded, stood up and shouted for his men to follow as he charged the German positions. The platoon under the command of Lieutenant Richard Smith got up and followed Staff Sergeant Williams. Advancing 300 yards, Williams came under devastating fire from the German 20mm flak wagon. Due to his hand being wounded, he was unable to pull the pin from his grenade, so he moved to one of his men who was able to pull it for him. Returning to within 10 feet of the flak wagon, he tossed the grenade into the vehicle, destroying it and the crew. The next vehicle was an SD KFZ 251/2 mortar carrier. The remaining men of his platoon were able to flank the Boutet house and capture it from the Germans and establish the battalion CP there. The remaining flak wagon, another SD KFZ 10/5, was further down the road near the Gaspard house, and along with its crew of 5 was dispatched by Corporal Curtis Adelot. After Lieutenant Smith was killed by sniper fire, Corporal Adelot assumed responsibility for the platoon after Williams had collapsed from blood loss as a result of his wounds, and the next senior NCO, Tech Sergeant Doc O'Neill, was wounded in the leg by shrapnel. Ordering one of the MG gunners to cover him, he skirted around the Boutet house and along with PFC Arlie O'Fairley to flank the SD KFZ 10/5. Hitting it with 3 bazooka rockets and fire from his Thompson submachine gun, Adelot had silenced another German vehicle. For his work, PFC O'Fairley was awarded the Silver Star. 1st Platoon had now destroyed 4 German MG positions, 2 half-tracks and a flak wagon. While B Company on the right flank was attacking, C Company on the left flank was in trouble moving through the open ground in front of Cheneux, as it was crisscrossed with those barbed wire fences and they couldn't be seen in the dark. The leading platoon only had 2 sets of wire cutters between them. Their progress was slow, and climbing over them would be suicidal in the face of withering German fire. As the men of C Company advanced, they came upon the German positions on the reverse side of the slope opposite the Boutet house. As they attacked the German positions, hand-to-hand fighting ensued. 20 Germans were killed, and the remainder of 2 enemy platoons withdrew into the main part of Cheneux. C Company by this time had suffered 20 casualties. As C Company's third wave emerged from the woods, it was hit by an intense German mortar barrage and a further 50 casualties were taken. By 2200 hours, B Company held a small toehold in the village for the cost of 60 men. C Company had advanced only 400 yards. The next position on the road toward the village was that of the Gaspard house, where another SDKFZ 251/17 was positioned. Due to the heavy casualties sustained by the evening's attack, the paratroopers needed to reorganise and couldn't continue until the support of the tank destroyers was called in. Reluctant to move, however, the lieutenant in charge had parked 450 yards to the west of the Boutet house, keeping his tank destroyers well out of range of the German guns. As a result, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison had to order them forward. However, their support was ineffectual, as they only advanced a further 100 yards towards the village, stopping at the edge of the woods, overlooking the approaches to Cheneux. Now, at this point in the battle, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison desperately needed to put in another push against the German positions. He committed the LMG platoon from HQ Company under the command of Lieutenant Howard Kemble. As he did so, the German fire was so intense that 5 out of these 8 LMG teams was wiped out. Seeing Kemble gunned down, 2nd Lieutenant William Jepsen picked up a 50 cal and carried it 50 yards further forward to start putting fire down on the German positions. In doing so, he enabled his men to then dig in around the Gaspard house and start to continue the fight against the Germans in the main body of Cheneux village itself. During the attack, Jepsen put down so much fire that he went through 5 boxes of 30 caliber ammunition, and his withering fire on the German positions knocked out one German MG position, and it also forced the SDKFZ 251/17 with the 20mm flak gun on the back of it to withdraw and the driver to button up after it was sprayed with multiple bursts of 30 caliber machine gun fire. Now, at this point, the lack of tank destroyer support became very obvious. Harrison noticed that the tank destroyer crews had only moved 100 yards further forward from the original positions when he ordered them into the attack. He turned to his mortar men and said that if they don't move forward, to start dropping mortar bombs on them. Now, on this, the tank destroyer crews decided, rather than risk being shot at by their own side, they would then advance into Cheneux and actually get stuck into the fight properly. Now, at 2300, Tucker, assessing the situation, decided that more reinforcements were required for B and C Company in their attack. With this, 2 anti-tank guns from the 80th AAA Battalion were brought forward, as well as G Company from 3rd Battalion, who had previously been held in the reserve. They were now sent forward on the left flank to go around the village and to help capture it. Now, G Company arrived at the start line at 0130 on the morning of the 21st of December, with their attack to go in at 0245 against the German positions in Cheneux. However, for G Company, they were hit very hard by 20mm flak fire, and as such, had to be withdrawn back to the 1st Battalion start line. Now, for the rest of the night, the Germans put in harassing fire, but there was no further action after G Company's failed attack on the left flank. For the remainder of the night, it was quiet, but at 0745 hours on the morning of the 21st of December, the Germans put in a final counterattack against the American positions. After a 30-minute preparatory bombardment by the Germans, they rushed into the American lines, but suffered very heavy casualties, and as such had to withdraw. For the remainder of the 21st, the men of 1st Battalion from the 504th continued to fight through Cheneux, clearing out the remaining German resistance. The SS that were here defending the village had been withdrawn, and it was just the Luftwaffe men from the anti-aircraft battalion that were here defending the village. By the time 1st Battalion had finished clearing Cheneux, they had knocked out 14 German flak wagons, 6 half-tracks and 4 trucks, as well as knocking out or capturing 4 105mm artillery pieces. Now, by the morning of the 22nd of December, the men of 1st Battalion who were here in Cheneux were then put into regimental reserve. Cheneux, however, would remain firmly in American hands for the rest of the Battle of the Bulge and until the war's end. The actions here by the men of the 504th remain remembered to this day by the locals here in Cheneux. There's this beautiful memorial to them, as well as information boards in the village that remember the battle that took place here in December 1944. If you've enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to hit that like button, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. Okay, I'll see you all in the next one.